Hello and welcome to the Charged Google It series. My name is Nancy and I'm joined today by Jorg, who will be answering the question, what does Christianity say about injustice? So yeah, what are your thoughts about this?
Whoa, that's a big one. I think for me the most important thing I would say is that Christianity has the really outlandish claim that injustice is the way to salvation. That sounds strange, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But what I mean by that is that Christianity teaches that the injustice that was suffered by Christ helps us understand a lot about ourselves and helps us repent when we really see ourselves in what happens to Jesus, when we say, this is me, this is not just people back then, this is me, and I would do the same thing, and I'm doing the same thing every day when I'm not thinking about my classmates, when I'm making fun of somebody, when I'm in my own work, overly judging somebody perhaps and just kind of moving on, and it's like, I don't have time for you, I gotta go. I'm sacrificing this person's life, so I'm doing these little things that ultimately brought the Son of God to death. And if I think about that, if I think about this injustice or put it on climate change, how my little choices of comfort over knowing what's right, when I truly see that, then I'm in front of the cross and I'm saying, God, this is not how I was supposed to live. This is not what I'm supposed to do here. And then Christianity says, this is the moment you receive life. Because we saw Jesus, we saw the Son of God, we saw God himself die, and yet he didn't die. He came toward me. There was resurrection power, and it's receiving that again. I am renewed. I can live. I have the courage to live again like I'm supposed to live, right? But it's only when I really touch the depths of that injustice that I can receive this, because otherwise I'm like, I'm fine, I'm okay. But actually realizing how embedded I am in the injustice of the world is important for us as Christians to really receive salvation and say, God, we need you, come here, help us. So I think that's why injustice is really, really central for Christians to think about and not just square away and say, it's all fine.
Yeah. So why do you think God let all those people die in the flood, as injustice?
Oh, you really like the tough ones. Let's work through this. So, we could have all sorts of answers to this, right? What are the kinds of answers you've heard about this? Why?
Yeah, it's the sort of answers about they were bad people, like that sort of thing.
And what's the problem with that, though?
Just because they're bad doesn't mean they deserve it necessarily.
Yeah, exactly. And beyond that, if you think, okay, what am I to learn from the story of the flood? So there were bad people, so God killed them. What do you take away from that then?
That doesn't make God sound very good.
It doesn't make God sound very good. So if I say God is love, but sometimes he likes to kill people,
Yeah.
And then of course you also get yourself into a place where you say, these are bad people, I'm with God, I should pronounce the same kind of judgment, I should expect God to kill these people, or even do it myself.
Yeah.
And we've seen that. So that's not really a good answer. What else do we have about answers? Does God change, for example? There's some people who say, well, that's the Old Testament God, right? So he's no longer doing that. We have the rainbow after the flood, so God said, oops, sorry, that's not quite what I meant. And that, I'm making it sound more ironic than it is, but that doesn't really work either. So I think the story for the flood for me would be, if I actually put the story of the flood in context, I learn a lot. And if I look at it as a story. And here's the thing. Have you heard of the Gilgamesh epoch? The Babylonian story?
Possibly.
In RE or something, you might come across this. So there's an old Babylonian myth about creation, all of that. And that has a lot of floods, because in the area people had floods all the time, and people would lose their livelihood, their crops, and would also get killed in flash floods and whatnot. So there's a story in there about a flood, and the gods bring about the flood because they're just a bit annoyed, and they have this wrangle among themselves. So they're going, let's just have some fun and kill some people, basically. That's the idea. And so if you put yourself in that context, so there's now people who are saying, okay, we've received these stories of the flood, and they're actually quite similar. So the Gilgamesh epoch is older than the story in the Bible. And the Gilgamesh epoch also has a guy who gets saved, but he only gets saved, and he builds a ship as well, because he is a favorite of the gods. So he has this insider deal kind of thing. So the people of Israel, in essence, they're saying, let's retell the received stories that we have, but let's retell them to say something else about God. And what are they saying? God is just. He is affected by the injustice he sees in the world. So if there is floods like this, it's us, we brought it on ourselves. So it's people reflecting about injustice in the story of the flood, and they're saying, well, there's something else that's happening. And then jump to the end of the story, and then God says, I'm not going to do this anymore because this is not the way forward. So you see how they've completely turned a contextual story around that was all about God's being like, oh, I don't care, it's just a fun game for us. Saying, let's talk about human injustice, let's talk about God's justice, and let's talk about his compassion that it actually affected him of this, when everybody was killed. So we can go on and on and on about whether the story happened this way and how the flood happened, but actually it's when you dig to the story level and you say, let's just look at what it means, what it's trying to tell us about God and people, you discover something really, really beautiful that's beyond all of this, like, why would he do that? As if it was a video of that time, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Is that also kind of links to like injustice happening to actual Christians as well?
It does, and I think that's where another thing happens, in that what the people of Israel take away from the old flood story is if something bad happens to you, and that's very much the myth of old Israel, it was because you did something wrong.
Yeah.
Can you remember a guy in the character that then works through this problem? Sorry, put you on the spot. He sits with his 3 friends. He's full of sores. He's just lost his children. His wife's starting to make fun of him, and he's completely ill. And before that, he was well, but God is now testing him.
Job.
Job, exactly. Yeah. And that whole book is all about this problem that Israel always believed: if something bad happened to you, it must mean you did something bad, because that's what the story of the flood was about. This is what the story of Israel was about. Whenever the people of Israel fell away, God punished them with bloodthirsty neighbors, basically. And in the end, Israel also goes into Babylonian exile. So the whole of Israel is rounded up, or at least actually the upper class mostly of Israel and Judea, eventually get rounded up and put into slavery, into exile. And that too, Israel felt like, we brought this on ourselves. So now they're reflecting, thinking through this, like, is it really that simple? And that's what the story of Job is about. Is it really that simple to say, because you did bad things, that's what God's, is now punishing you? And I think the story ends inconclusively, because in the end, Job is vindicated up to a point, because God judges his friends and says, it's not that simple. You were supposed to be friends, and you tell Job all the time, you did this wrong. But Job, when he demands an answer from God and says, what, why? God says, where were you when I created the universe? Do you even understand how complex this whole thing is? Have you ever heard of all these, and then all sort of mythical creatures come out that the people who wrote the story believed existed? Do you even know how this works? Do you even know how the behemoth, survives and all of this? So I guess the point for me is to say the Bible itself arrives at the conclusion to say it's a lot more complicated than that. And injustice will be suffered by all. But if we now link it full circle back to where we started with Jesus, it is God who's affected by it too. He is with you in this. He's going through this. And sometimes you've got to trust that there's new life at the other end of it. And you've got to look injustice in the face, bring that to the cross and look injustice in the face there, your own and those of others, and say, but God redeems. There is a resurrection. He will come again. And with that, I don't even just mean say, you're not doing well today, you're ill, maybe, wait for death and then new life. But actually just to say, there is going to be a different moment. You can receive that salvation from God, even now in the life today, that there is new hope, new joy that can come toward you. I think that's the story. But of course, that's difficult for someone to wrestle with. It's not something that you can easily just check, I believe it, I'm done. And that's why I believe Christianity is actually all about these questions that you're asking about injustice, because we have to wrestle with it. That's what it's about. Being indifferent to injustice is, to me, the antithesis of being a Christian, because you just take a cynical approach to the world. It's just how it is. Strong eats the weak. You're done. And as Christians, we want to wrestle with God about injustices.
Yeah, absolutely. For as 11 to 18-year-olds, like, what can we do as in, like... Yeah. Like...
Wow, yeah. I struggle with that because I have kids your age, so I don't want to put the burden of the world on your shoulders, but in some sense, actually, it is waking up to injustice that's important, because that prompts important social movements. If you think about Black Lives Matter, or what I see in your generation about climate change, actually calling adults out and saying, this is not okay, this is not the world we want to inherit. So I think the first thing I would say, again, it is important to think about injustice and think about it. And I know as a teenager, you go through all sorts of things, thinking about how do I appear, what does it seem like, and a lot of, if I may say, like a lot of self-centered thought. And that's healthy and normal and good, but we live in a culture that feeds that through, Instagram filters and whatever. I mean, showing my age is probably a lot more sophisticated stuff already, but like, it's a self-centered culture. How do I feel? What do I want to be? What am I? And I think it's important to break out of that and find a cause, first of all. I don't think it's right to want to fix the whole world, but if there's something that's deep to your heart, if climate justice, and not just the environment degrading, but what it does to different people as well. Justice here in Egham, I mean, there's a great charity we're partnering with called East to West, who are looking after kids who are just from, I don't want to say deprived, sounds wrong, just circumstances where they don't get the full help that other kids get. And homelessness in this country, development aid, there's so many things. So I think it's important for 11 to 18-year-olds just as much as for 40 to 50-year-olds, not that I would be in that bracket, to not let our daily lives take over, and to make time for the injustice of this world, and then say, this is the thing I need to be amplifying, I need to talk about in school, I need to talk to my mates about. I can retweet stuff in this area and it shows up with people, and then suddenly there's something else that feeds into my timeline and just pop or whatever. So I think that's really something that you can do when the world feels like you don't really have much room to influence it. But it's those little actions. Or even just, if you look at the environment around you, just go and grab a trash bag and collect a bit of rubbish. It's not going to make a difference. It's not going to rid the world of rubbish, but it's a prophetic action almost to say, like, this is not okay. I care about this. So finding that place that you care about, I think that is important. Finding a place about injustice that you care about. Say, this is what I'm going to take to the cross. Mm-hmm. And sometimes this could also be an injustice in you, that you realize, I just really didn't react properly. I know there's somebody hurting in my class, and I just went along with everybody else, make fun of it because that's the thing to do. I didn't want to be lumped in together with them. Then sometimes that's an injustice one needs to first take to the cross and then to the person. And say, let's hang out after school, or tell me more about that, or just finding that place where you think, I should be making a difference. I shouldn't just glide along and make the injustices somehow about God, as if they're his problem to fix and not the stuff that comes outside of us.
Yeah, I remember you saying that God is just.
Yeah.
So in the Bible, do we see hope that there's justice in the future?
Yeah.
Less injustice?
Yeah. I think so. Absolutely. I mean, that's what the story of resurrection is all about.
Yeah.
But the story of resurrection has a strange twist in it, in that Jesus often isn't recognized. So that we see the kingdom coming and we only realize it in the moment that something signaling type happens, right? So you might be caring for somebody, or you might be picking up litter and it just feels like drudge and people are making fun of you. And then something clicks in your head and you meet, I don't know, a munchak in the forest or something. I mean, just to bring it back to that analogy, and you realize, wow, this is a beautiful place. those are signs of the kingdom of God. We don't always recognize them. And in many, many days, it takes faith. Like, I struggle with that in my own life, that I sometimes think, why not just give up? Injustice keeps happening. What has really changed since Jesus came? We still have the same kind of wars. We still have the same kinds of things. But our faith encourages us to say, no, take those signs seriously. First of all, this is true resurrection power. Jesus did rise from the dead, and he's there. And what the disciples experienced on Easter Sunday was God's power coming toward them. They couldn't kill it. It was impossible to kill God. And then translate that into faith of a different kingdom come. Now, we've been waiting for God's kingdom to come down to earth for 2,000 years. I mean, the early Christians believed it was going to happen within 10, 20 years. And that really propelled their community. We don't know why it takes so long, but we still have those signs and that hope that needs to carry us forward, that when you go litter picking, it's not just to judge the others. It's not just to point to injustice, but it is actually that sign of, no. I'm going to hold on to that world, that what the Bible tells us in the beginning paradise was like is also the future of humanity, that God will come toward us. We're not going to bring that about ourselves, but that in the end, somehow God will come toward us and we will go there. That's what I'm pointing my life towards. That's what I'm looking ahead to. And that's what guides my values today. Yeah. And I think that's the key. That I think about what is the future I'm envisioning and how do I then carry myself forward toward that future. And if I think it's just all doom and gloom and cosmic death, then I might as well just drink, be merry, and be the worst person I can be, because it all means nothing. And I think that's what the choice comes down to, being Christian in the end. Do I believe that through injustice, through looking at injustice, reflecting my own injustice, I can really find God and I can find that future and live toward it? Or do I just say, that's just how these things happen. Might as well just be as strong and as mean as I can be so I can be the one to survive. I think that's what the choice comes down to.
Yeah, that was really interesting. You've given us a lot to think about, but can I ask you to sum up what Christianity says about injustice in one sentence?
In one sentence. One sentence. You're asking an academic to do that in one sentence. Okay. What Christianity is about injustice is that through the story of the cross and resurrection, we can become whole. We see the amount of injustice in the cross, and in the resurrection we receive justification. We receive that hope that injustice isn't going to be the last word, that God isn't going to be killed by our injustice, but that he will come toward us and bring us to him if we let him.